Did Bill Bellamy really miss his chance with Janet Jackson? The truth behind the what-if romance. When we talk about the golden age of 90s entertainment, two names instantly stand out in very different, but equally powerful ways: Bill Bellamy and Janet Jackson. Bill Bellamy was one of the coolest, funniest, and most recognizable faces of the decade. He had charisma, confidence, and that effortless energy that made him a standout in everything he touched. Whether it was his memorable appearances on hit TV shows like Martin, or his roles in beloved films like How to Be a Player and Love Jones, Bellamy had that unmistakable 90s star quality that audiences couldn't get enough of. And then, of course, there was Janet Jackson. Janet wasn't just a superstar, she was a phenomenon. By the 90s, she had already cemented herself as one of the most influential artists in music history. With massive hits like Rhythm Nation, That's the Way Love Goes, Again, and so many more, she was dominating the charts, redefining pop and R&B, and setting the standard for what it meant to be an icon. She had talent, beauty, mystery, and a level of star power that very few people ever reach. So naturally, when stories began to surface about a possible romantic connection between Bill Bellamy and Janet Jackson, or at least the idea that there could have been one, fans were instantly intrigued. Because let's be honest, that sounds like the ultimate 90s power couple. And for years, one particular question has continued to pop up in conversations, interviews, and social media discussions: did Bill Bellamy really fumble his chance with Janet Jackson? It's one of those celebrity what-if stories that refuses to die. It's fun, it's fascinating, and it taps into that irresistible curiosity people have about the relationships that almost happened but never quite did. Was there truly a romantic spark between them? Did Bill Bellamy have a real shot with Janet Jackson and let it slip away? Or has the whole thing become a bigger pop culture myth than reality? Today, we're diving into the full story behind the rumor, the comments Bill Bellamy has made over the years, and why this moment still captures people's imagination all these years later. Because sometimes, the relationships that never happened become just as legendary as the ones that did. A perfect 90s what-if story. Part of the reason this story has lasted so long is because it feels like something straight out of a 90s movie. You have Bill Bellamy, handsome, funny, confident, and rising fast in Hollywood. He was the kind of guy who could walk into a room and own it. He had that magnetic personality that made him relatable and aspirational at the same time. Fans loved him because he came across as authentic, naturally funny, and full of charm. Then you have Janet Jackson, elegant, private, incredibly talented, and one of the most desired women in entertainment. She was admired not only for her music and performances, but for the mystery she carried. Janet always had a way of making people feel close to her while still remaining deeply private. Put those two names in the same sentence, and people are already interested. That's what makes the Bill Bellamy and Janet Jackson story so compelling. It's not just about whether they dated or didn't date. It's about the idea of what could have happened if timing had been different, if someone had made a move, if emotions had lined up, if life had slowed down for just a second. That's the magic of a missed moment. And in Hollywood, those missed moments often become bigger than the real thing. Where did the story come from? The rumor, or maybe more accurately the anecdote, gained traction because Bill Bellamy himself has spoken about Janet Jackson in interviews. That's what gives the story life. This isn't just a random tabloid invention that came out of nowhere. Bellamy has actually reflected on the situation and shared enough details to make people believe there was, at the very least, a real possibility that something more could have happened. Over time, fans pieced together the story from different interviews, clips, and comments. And the overall message seemed to be this: Bill Bellamy admired Janet Jackson deeply. There was some level of chemistry, mutual respect, or at least closeness. But for one reason or another, things never moved forward in a serious romantic direction. That's where the fumble narrative comes in. People love to take a nuanced real-life moment and turn it into a simple sports metaphor. In internet language, if someone had a chance with someone amazing and didn't capitalize on it, they fumbled. And in the eyes of many fans, Janet Jackson is the kind of once-in-a-lifetime woman that if you had a shot and didn't take it, well, that's a fumble. But according to Bellamy's own reflections, the truth may be a little more complicated than that. Bill Bellamy's perspective more than just regret. One of the most interesting parts of this story is how Bill Bellamy talks about it. He doesn't come across as bitter. He doesn't sound like he's trying to create drama. And he doesn't frame it like some huge heartbreak. Instead, there's usually a tone of admiration, nostalgia, and just a touch of regret. That's what makes it feel real. When Bellamy discusses Janet, it seems clear that he held and still holds a lot of respect for her. Not just as a global superstar, but as a person. That matters. Because often when celebrities talk about past almost relationships, it can sound exaggerated or performative. But in Bellamy's case, it often feels like he's simply reflecting on a chapter of life, where he recognizes that maybe he didn't fully understand the opportunity in front of him. And that's something a lot of people can relate to. Sometimes in life, you don't realize how special a moment is until it's already passed. Sometimes you meet someone incredible, but you're not in the right headspace. Sometimes your career is taking off, your life is moving fast, and the timing just isn't right. And by the time you fully process what was possible, the window is closed. That doesn't necessarily mean you blew it. It just means you were human. Was he ready for something serious? This is where the story gets more interesting. From Bellamy's comments over the years, one theme seems to come up again and again: he may not have been ready. And honestly, that changes everything. Because when people hear Bill Bellamy had a chance with Janet Jackson and missed it, the first reaction is usually something dramatic. How could you possibly mess that up? But real life isn't that simple. At that point in his life, Bellamy was building his career. He was focused, ambitious, and in the middle of a major rise in entertainment. For a lot of people, especially in Hollywood, those years are chaotic. Everything is moving fast. New opportunities are coming nonstop. There's pressure, excitement, ego, uncertainty, all of it. In that kind of environment, serious relationships can be difficult. Even if the connection is real, even if the person is amazing, even if, years later, you look back and think, maybe I should have handled that differently. Bellamy has seemed to suggest that timing and personal readiness were major factors. That's not a small detail, because if he truly wasn't in a place emotionally or mentally to pursue something meaningful, then maybe this wasn't about him fumbling Janet Jackson at all. Maybe it was simply two people crossing paths at the wrong moment. And that happens every day, even to celebrities. Friendship, respect, and the what-if factor. Another key part of this story is that Bellamy has emphasized the value of the friendship. That's important because it adds emotional depth to the narrative. This wasn't just about physical attraction or celebrity status. It wasn't just, oh wow, Janet Jackson liked him. The impression Bellamy gives is that there was a genuine connection rooted in mutual respect and appreciation. That makes the story more compelling because friendships that almost become romances often leave the deepest what-if feelings. Why? Because the foundation is already there. You already enjoy each other's company. You already trust each other. You already see qualities in that person that go beyond surface-level attraction. And when a connection like that doesn't evolve, people naturally wonder what might have happened if one person had been a little bolder, a little clearer, a little more available. That's why fans remain fascinated. Because this doesn't sound like a random celebrity rumor. It sounds like a real missed moment. Not necessarily tragic, not necessarily dramatic, but definitely memorable. Why fans keep calling it a fumble? Let's be honest, the internet loves a good fumble story. And when the woman involved is Janet Jackson, the reactions become even more intense. For many people, Janet represents more than beauty or fame. She represents class, talent, elegance, legacy, and cultural impact. She's the kind of celebrity who feels almost untouchable in the best way possible. So when fans hear that someone had a possible chance with Janet, and it didn't happen, the reaction is immediate: you had Janet Jackson, and let that go. That's the emotional logic behind the fumble label. But labels like that flatten the complexity of real life. Because what people call a fumble might actually be bad timing, emotional immaturity, career pressure, uncertainty, fear of ruining a friendship, not recognizing a moment until later, or simply not being aligned in the same way at the same time. And that's what makes this story feel more relatable than people realize. It's not just celebrity gossip. It's a human story. A lot of people have their own version of a Janet Jackson moment. Not literally Janet Jackson, of course, but someone they met, admired, connected with, and later wondered about. Someone they think back on years later and say, if I had been a little older, if I had been more confident, if I wasn't so focused on work, if I had said what I really felt. That's why this story resonates. It reflects a universal feeling, a candid reflection, not a scandal. One reason this topic continues to circulate is because Bellamy has been candid enough to keep it alive. He's shared the story in a way that feels open, self-aware, and honest. And that kind of honesty always grabs attention. People love when celebrities pull back the curtain and reveal something personal, especially when it's not wrapped in scandal. This isn't a messy breakup story. This isn't a betrayal. This isn't tabloid chaos. It's actually something much softer and more reflective. It's a man looking back at a meaningful chapter and admitting that maybe he sees it differently now than he did then. That vulnerability is rare, and it makes the story memorable, because instead of gossip, it feels like wisdom. Instead of drama, it feels like perspective. Instead of a headline, it feels like a life lesson. Could it ever have really worked? Now here's the big question. Even if Bill Bellamy had made a move, even if he had been more decisive, even if the timing had been better, would it have actually worked? That's the part nobody can truly answer. And maybe that's exactly why the story remains so powerful. Because unresolved stories are often the most fascinating ones. When a relationship happens and ends, we eventually get closure. But when a relationship almost happens, that's a permanent mystery. You can project anything onto it. Maybe they would have become one of the greatest celebrity couples of the 90s. Maybe they would have dated briefly and realized they were better as friends. Maybe the pressure of fame would have made it impossible. Maybe the chemistry was real, but the lifestyles didn't match. Maybe it would have been beautiful. Maybe it would have been messy. No one knows. And that uncertainty is what keeps the legend alive. The power of timing in relationships. If there's one lesson hidden inside this entire story, it's this: timing matters more than people think. Sometimes you can meet the right person at the wrong time, and that can be more painful, or at least more haunting, than meeting the wrong person altogether. Because when the person is right, but the timing is off, there's always a lingering possibility. A door that never fully opened. A version of life that exists only in imagination. That's what makes the Bill Bellamy and Janet Jackson story feel so timeless. It's not about celebrity exclusivity. It's about emotional truth. Bellamy's reflection seems to suggest that he understands that now. Maybe at the time, he was doing exactly what he needed to do. Maybe he was focused on becoming the man he was meant to become. Maybe he couldn't have handled a relationship like that in a healthy way back then. And if that's true, then maybe the story isn't about losing Janet Jackson. Maybe it's about learning from a moment that taught him something important about readiness, priorities, and self-awareness. So, did he really fumble? Here's the honest answer: maybe, but not in the way people think. If by fumble you mean he failed to recognize a potentially amazing opportunity in the moment, then sure, maybe there's some truth to that. If by fumble you mean he was immature, distracted, or not fully prepared for what was in front of him, that's possible too. But if by fumble you mean he carelessly threw away some guaranteed fairytale romance with Janet Jackson, that's probably too simplistic. Life is rarely that clean. Relationships are rarely that obvious. And celebrity stories especially get reduced into catchy narratives that don't reflect the full reality. What Bellamy's comments really seem to reveal is something much more nuanced. He admired Janet. He valued the connection. He may have wondered what if, and in hindsight, he may wish he had moved differently. That's not necessarily a catastrophic fumble. That's called being human. Why this story still matters in pop culture? You might wonder why people still talk about this years later. The answer is simple: because the 90s still hold a special place in pop culture. And stories like this bring that era back to life. They remind us of a time when stars felt larger than life, when celebrity relationships were mysterious, and when moments like these lived in whispers, interviews, and fan speculation instead of constant social media oversharing. There's something nostalgic about imagining alternate versions of 90s Hollywood. What if certain couples had happened? What if certain friendships had turned romantic? What if some stars had made different choices? The Bill Bellamy and Janet Jackson story fits perfectly into that category. It's charming, it's intriguing, it's harmless enough to be fun, and it reveals just enough emotion to feel meaningful. That's why people keep revisiting it. Final thoughts: the truth behind the missed moment. At the end of the day, the truth behind Bill Bellamy's missed moment with Janet Jackson probably isn't some dramatic Hollywood secret. It's likely much simpler than that. Two successful people crossed paths during a fast-moving, high-pressure time in their lives. There was admiration. There may have been chemistry. There was definitely respect. But timing, priorities, and personal readiness seemed to have prevented it from becoming something more. And years later, Bellamy can look back on it with honesty, humor, and just enough regret to make the story unforgettable. That's what gives this whole narrative its staying power. Not scandal, not gossip, not sensationalism, just a deeply relatable truth. Sometimes the moments that stay with us the longest are the ones that never fully happened. And maybe that's why fans continue to ask the question: did Bill Bellamy really fumble Janet Jackson? Maybe, maybe not. But one thing is certain: it's one of those classic 90s what-if stories that will probably keep people talking for years to come. Outro / call to action: what do you think? Did Bill Bellamy truly miss out on something special with Janet Jackson? Was it a real fumble, or was it simply a case of bad timing and being in the wrong place emotionally at the wrong time? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because honestly, this is one of those celebrity stories where everybody has an opinion. And if you love deep dives into iconic pop culture moments, untold celebrity stories, and those unforgettable what-if moments from the 90s and beyond, make sure you subscribe and stick around. Because sometimes, the stories that almost happened are the ones we can't stop talking about. Thanks for the watching and subscribe.